7:25. We're having a view of the moon. We're going to capture its image for the next 15 minutes. I'm going to play with the histogram, set it up so that whatever might fly in front of it will not be overwhelmed. There we go. It's getting better all the time. I did mount the Optilon filter again because I was kind of disappointed the previous evening and two previous evenings with the fact that I was not getting good images of nebulae, especially the Eastern Veil, as well as um, the Crescent Nebula 68888. What I'm also doing now is I'm going to play a little bit with the right ascension, the azimuth, and the declination to try to keep the moon centered in the screen. I've done this before, but the problem was I may have already loaded the previous model, which makes it kind of null and void the result because you're basically just leveraging off a previous model, which is correcting for the issue anyway. So I'm going to try to keep the moon just on one axis centered. Now, I can't do much about the fact that it drifts east-west. That has to do with an error in the encoder count driving mechanism for each second of time or sub-second of time. And that needs to be attended to using error, a PEC setting, but the interface that I have on the Gemini 2 handset doesn't seem to make sense to me yet, because you can start a PEC training session, but you can't stop it. And that really doesn't quite work out for me. So what I'm going to do is make a few adjustments without having a model loaded into the scope. Now, it was off by, I would say, about 3 or 4 degrees in terms of turning up the moon. It seemed to be perfectly online on the right ascension axis because all I had to do was press one button to pretty much get it centered up. But it was off. Actually, it was off by 4 degrees. It was on in the declination axis, but off in the right ascension. So now I'm going to make some very minor changes in the right ascension axis to keep the moon centered in the field, which I already did initially. It's going to be some shifting. Now, one problem I've discovered with the scope and the mount is I may have set it up incorrectly because there's some knobs that are interfering with my ability to adjust the right ascension axis. It's actually called the azimuth, but it's the one that has the most influence on the right ascension. Well, by loosening up that knob, I've already shifted it over. So here's a little turn to the right, shifting it over to the left. I'm using the easternmost knob and I'm turning it clockwise. So let's see how well she centers up, giving it the time that I have available. I do believe I said it was, we're now about 3 minutes and 30 seconds into capturing this image of the moon. In the future, I may bring out a lunography map and then be able to point at different things. For instance, Mare Crisium here, Tranquillitatis, etc., 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 many of these craters on the Terminator, and that familiarized myself a bit more with lunography. I think this is, I can't remember if it's Posidonius, I believe this major crater here is. Craters tend to proliferate to the south of the moon, and that makes sense because we are now flipped and we're observing to the west. Ordinarily, when the scope is catching things on the ascendant, this will be flipped around. This will be north, this will be south. We know this is west because the moon is facing towards the set sun. So this is west and this is east. This is south and this is north. But things shift around quite a bit. In fact, I think this becomes east instead of west. Yeah. In other words, everything seems to flip when the scope is oriented east and west in terms of its right ascension axis. So right now the scope is driving from a culmination towards the sunset. And usually when I do deep sky studies, I try to capture them on ascent when they're rising out of the east into the sky's middle third. Tonight I will be doing some imaging, and that imaging will be in the NGC 7000 to 7100 series, and it'll be purely whatever I feel like observing. Now I want you to notice this gap. I made a slight adjustment in the azimuth, and this gap is remaining pretty consistent here. And if it remains consistent throughout this 15-minute, I guess it was about 12-minute cycle, then I will feel like finally I've nailed down the azimuth setting. Uh, so what I'll have to do then is I'll have to remodel the scope. But last night, since I did not observe to the west, I will do a modeling to the west and then to the east and then save the model. One of the things you have to do is make sure that your internal clock in the Gemini 2 control system is accurate. And that typically gains about 3 seconds every 24 hours. But I do have a sat clock I can check to make sure that it's accurate. But right now, boy, these gaps are really quite consistent. Maybe a little further here, a little closer there, but there's not enough fine-tuned control to really perfect it. I'm also liking the fact that the moon is staying fairly centered in the screen. This distance here matters as well. And because I just took the lens cap off the scope, I probably want to play with the focus a little bit. But you should be aware that even though this is it's probably a 6.5 day moon, not quite half, it is deep, deep, deep to the south right now, which means that it shouldn't have that much effect on deep sky in terms of my imaging later this evening. So we're now about 7 minutes and 20 seconds into this capture video, and I have yet to see anything unusual uh, fly between the telescope and the moon. And typically, if it's something close, it'll be really out of focus and it'll pass really quickly. If it's something out at least, well, let's call it about a half a mile, the focus should be as perfect as the moon focus is. Now, it could end up distorted simply because it moves so fast through the frame. And the frame right now is set at 1/10,000th of a second. And then when I poured it in, if something flies over and I decide to publish it, and I poured it into uh, Movie Maker software, then you're down to 0.03, 3/1000ths of a second. So things won't look quite as good once it's ported over to Windows Movie Maker as it would with the raw video. Now, I don't know if there's any metadata associated with these raw videos. Since there may not be, I've decided I state the time and the date in my videos. Right now it's 7:34. It's on the 28th of September, a Sunday evening. I did not expect the sky to be clear this evening. We are expecting rain here in the John Day Valley. But I noticed that the sky was quite clear, quite beautiful. So I just felt compelled to get out here and run this test one more time. We have about 6 minutes in this 15-minute cycle. Now, it'll be a very interesting thing to see that although I don't do this very frequently, typically the moon has to be viewable, and I'll do it maybe a couple of times in a lunar cycle, how many of these imaging sessions will it take before something unusual, let's just say something fairly ordinary like a commercial airliner or a chopper or something flies over. I would expect that to happen with some frequency. I've seen it happen in the eyepiece looking at the moon. But I would say it probably doesn't happen more than 1% of the time. And something that's really anomalous, now I don't even ever expect to catch it, But if more folks were to take the time to do this kind of image capture, real-time imaging at a high frame rate with the moon, who knows what might turn up. Anyway, it's time for those of us who have some kind of interest in unusual aerial phenomena, whatever it may be, to actually take some, make some sacrifices and actually do a little bit to see if we can move the ball down the field in terms of identifying what is colloquially now called uh, unidentified aerial phenomena, but has been in the past called unidentified flying objects, UFOs. Of course, if you do some research into ufology, you'll find that they do fly, but there have been images taken back in the 1950s before there were satellites, which showed extremely strange things flying across what are called photographic plates that were used with a Schmidt camera, 48-inch Schmidt camera. Those photographic plates are available on theskylive.com, but mysteriously, certain NGC studies just don't appear on it. You can't find them. And as I've heard as a story, anyway, the fellow who inspected the plate was formerly an astronomer from the University of, from MIT, I believe it was, somewhere on the East Coast. And he basically got rid of all the plates, supposedly, that might have showed anything anomalous in terms of their motion through the plates while the plates were being exposed. So, I see we're drifting a little bit to the right. We're now almost 12 minutes in. I'll make another slight adjustment, and I do believe I moved it clockwise last time. We'll shift the moon over to the left a wee bit, equilibrating out the gaps between the left and the right-hand side of the moon. This is something that makes a lot of sense when you have a scope that you cannot see Polaris with. I have a house behind me and a wall in the observatory and one of the roof trines. So I can't image to the north, nor can I image to the west. But since most everything I want to capture is either culminating into the south or ascending into the east, I think it works out rather fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and adjust the focus one more time, but this is actually quite a good image. And once again, I'm pretty impressed with the sharpness of the image, given the fact that I am using the Optilon filter. So that threw it a little out of focus. Now I'm using a coarse focuser right now because it's not as accessible. The fine focuser is on the far side of the telescope in the current location. Now I just did mess up the position of the moon in terms of adjusting the focus. But now what I'm going to do is just keep looking, keep it tangential grazing this right side of the field before I make any more adjustments. So now 13 minutes, 20 seconds in, we have another 2 minutes left, minute 30 left before I go ahead and sign off. I have yet to see anything suspicious pass in front of the moon, but typically you will get an insect or you will get a distant bird, and I haven't even seen those. And I did catch an insect last night, but it was so diffuse I knew it was an insect. It was out of focus. So I basically trashed that video. Okay, now on my mark, 14 minutes in, we have 1 more minute of image capture. And then what I'm going to have to do is do a 3-star alignment to the west as best I can, and then again to the east before I begin the NGC 7100 to 7199 series. But anyway, we've had a nice view of the moon. Not bad. I'm not going to go ahead and zoom in on it to show you anything because this is just a session to capture any anomalous phenomena that may fly in the face of the moon. Once again, almost 15 minutes. If it's luminous, we'll see it here. If it's shadowed, we'll see it there. This is the perfect time of the moon because it's to the south and slightly to the west. The full moon, half moon should be on the morrow. And with that, I'm going to say, seize the night.